A lonely millionaire heard noises in his mansion. When he checked the garage, he found 5 identical one-year-old baby girls, abandoned and crying. Just before the story starts, wherever you are on your journey, consider this your sign to keep going. The March rain pounded against the windows of Alexander Reed's Pacific Heights mansion, creating a symphony of water against glass that usually brought him comfort. Tonight, however, as lightning illuminated his study in brief flashes, the 38-year-old tech magnate couldn't shake a feeling of unease. 3 years had passed since Catherine's death, yet her absence still echoed through the 15,000 square feet of polished marble and designer furniture that had never quite felt like home without her. 3 years, Alexander muttered, running his fingers through salt and pepper hair that had begun graying prematurely after the cancer took her. At 38, he had accomplished what most couldn't in several lifetimes, revolutionizing quantum computing, building Reed Technologies into a global powerhouse worth billions, and amassing personal wealth that placed him firmly among America's 50 richest individuals. Yet here he sat, alone on a stormy Tuesday night in March 2023, reviewing acquisition proposals with only an expensive scotch for company. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight as Alexander stretched his tired shoulders. That's when he heard it, a sound so incongruous with his meticulously controlled environment that at first he thought he'd imagined it. A cry, then another. It seemed to be coming from the direction of his 6-car garage. Probably just the wind, he reasoned. But when the sound came again, distinctly human and unmistakably infantile, he set down his crystal tumbler with a frown. Alexander grabbed his smartphone, activating its flashlight function as he made his way through the mansion's west wing. The security system showed no breaches, but as he approached the door leading to the courtyard, the cries grew more distinct. Multiple voices, high-pitched and desperate. Rain soaked through his custom Tom Ford shirt as he crossed the courtyard. The manicured gardens transformed into shadowy shapes in the darkness. The crying intensified, a chorus of distress that quickened his pace despite his usual measured demeanor. The side entrance to the garage was unlocked, a security anomaly that instantly put him on alert. As he pushed the door open, the motion-activated lights revealed what his security system had somehow missed, a handcrafted wicker basket placed deliberately in the center of the polished concrete floor. "What the hell?" Alexander whispered, approaching cautiously. The basket contained not one baby, but 5 identical little girls with wispy dark hair and tear-streaked faces, their tiny bodies wrapped in pink blankets, now damp from the rain. They couldn't have been more than a year old. Alexander stood frozen, his mind racing to process the impossible scene before him. One of the babies locked eyes with him, her crying briefly interrupted by curiosity at this tall stranger. 4 more pairs of identical eyes turned toward him, their perfect little faces so similar yet somehow distinct in their expressions. Tucked into the basket's edge was a medical bracelet. Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he read the printed text, Vasquez Quintuplets, DOB, March 15th, 2022. "Exactly 1 year old," he whispered, calculation automatic despite his shock. The absurdity of the situation struck him. Alexander Reed, whose calendar was booked months in advance, whose decisions affected global markets, whose life was defined by rigid control, standing in his garage at midnight, staring helplessly at 5 abandoned babies who had appeared like some cosmic joke at his expense. One of the babies reached toward him, tiny fingers grasping at the air. Something shifted in Alexander's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since holding Catherine's hand for the last time. Without conscious decision, he knelt beside the basket. "Where did you come from?" he asked softly, knowing they couldn't answer but needing to break the surreal silence that had fallen between the infant's cries. "The security breach?" The precision of the placement, the timing on their birthday, none of it was random. Someone had chosen him specifically, navigated his extensive security, and entrusted these children to him for a reason. As lightning flashed again, illuminating 5 pairs of identical dark eyes looking up at him with an expression of complete vulnerability, Alexander Reed had the distinct sensation that his carefully constructed life had just been irrevocably changed. "This is Reed. I need a full security sweep of the property immediately. Someone's breached the perimeter." Alexander's voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. 5 pairs of eyes tracked his movement as he paced beside their basket. Phone pressed to his ear. "No, don't call the police yet," he instructed his head of security. "Just get the team here. There's been a situation." How could he possibly explain what he'd found? After ending the call, Alexander carefully lifted the damp blanket covering the baby's feet, discovering a sealed plastic bag containing a handwritten note. The paper inside was partially protected from the rain, the elegant handwriting still legible. "Please care for my daughters temporarily. They're in danger. I'll contact you when it's safe. They need someone with resources and integrity. You're the only one who can protect them." No signature, no explanation of the danger, no time frame for temporarily. "This is insane," Alexander muttered, running a hand through his hair as one of the babies began wailing again, triggering a chain reaction until all 5 were crying in a discordant chorus that echoed through the cavernous garage. With uncharacteristic uncertainty, Alexander lifted one of the infants, awkwardly supporting her head, as he'd once seen a colleague do with his newborn. The baby's crying subsided slightly at the human contact, her tiny hand clutching his finger with surprising strength. "Shh, it's okay," he whispered, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. When was the last time he'd comforted another person, Catherine, in her hospital room, promising everything would be okay when they both knew it wouldn't? Balancing the baby in one arm, Alexander pulled out his phone again and dialed his executive assistant. "Sophia, I need you at the house immediately," he said when she answered, her voice groggy with sleep. "Bring emergency baby supplies, everything, formula, diapers, whatever 1-year-old quintuplets would need." "Mr. Reed, did you say quintuplets?" Sophia's voice lost all traces of sleepiness. "Yes, 5 identical baby girls. And contact CPS. We need a social worker here. Then call my attorney." After giving additional instructions, Alexander ended the call and carefully returned the baby to her sisters. His security team would arrive in minutes, followed by Sophia. He needed to think clearly, to approach this like any other crisis requiring management. The security team arrived first, 4 men in tactical gear who swept the property while their leader, Martinez, stood dumbfounded beside Alexander in the garage. "5 babies, sir?" he repeated, staring at the basket. "Someone disabled the camera covering the service entrance," Alexander replied, ignoring the question. "Find out how." By the time Sophia arrived, her SUV loaded with bags from an all-night superstore, the social worker was already en route, and Alexander had moved the basket to his rarely used living room. "Oh my goodness," Sophia gasped, seeing the 5 identical faces. At 45, she'd been with Alexander for a decade, managing his business affairs with ruthless efficiency. Nothing in her job description had prepared her for this. Ms. Cortez from Child Protective Services arrived next, a stern-faced woman whose expression softened slightly at the sight of the quintuplets, now being awkwardly bottle-fed by Alexander, Sophia, and 2 security team members. "Mr. Reed, can you explain how you came to have 5 infants in your possession?" she asked, notebook ready. Alexander explained the discovery, showing her the note and medical bracelet. "These children will need to be placed in emergency foster care immediately," Ms. Cortez stated. "Finding a placement for quintuplets will be challenging, but what if I could provide emergency foster care myself?" The words left Alexander's mouth before he'd fully processed the thought. At least until their mother is located? Ms. Cortez raised an eyebrow. Mr. Reed, with all due respect, you have no childcare experience, and quintuplets require extensive— I have unlimited resources, Alexander interrupted. I can hire qualified nannies immediately. My home has ample space. While you're searching for a suitable placement that can accommodate all 5 together, they could remain in a stable environment. Something in his tone must have conveyed more than his words, because Miss Cortez studied him thoughtfully before responding. It's highly irregular, but given the circumstances. She glanced at the babies, who had finally settled with full bellies. I'll need to conduct an emergency home inspection, and you'll need to submit to background checks. Alexander nodded, relief washing over him for reasons he couldn't articulate. Of course. As dawn broke over San Francisco, Alexander Reed, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, found himself signing temporary emergency custody papers with hands that trembled slightly, committing to care for 5 little strangers who had appeared in his life like a thunderclap. Temporary emergency custody is granted for 72 hours, Miss Cortez explained, as she finalized the paperwork early that morning. After that, we'll need a hearing to determine longer-term arrangements while the investigation proceeds. Alexander nodded, forcing his exhausted mind to focus on the logistics. The quintuplets were now sleeping peacefully in the makeshift nursery Sophia had helped arrange in a guest suite. 5 portable cribs, mountains of diapers, formula, and hastily purchased baby clothes formed a surreal contrast to the suite's minimalist luxury. I'll need references for qualified nannies with multiples experience, Alexander told Sophia, who was already typing furiously on her tablet. I've contacted a premier agency that specializes in high-profile placements, she replied. They're sending 2 candidates this morning. I've also rescheduled your meetings for the next 3 days and initiated the security protocols for the children. Alexander smiled tiredly. This was why he paid Sophia a salary that raised eyebrows even among his executive peers. She anticipated needs before he articulated them. Detective Isabella Rivera arrived as Ms. Cortez was leaving, her sharp eyes taking in the transformation of Alexander's austere home into an impromptu nursery. Mr. Reed, I'm investigating the abandonment case, she began, following him to his study. This appears very targeted. Do you have any connection to quintuplets or their potential mother? Alexander shook his head. None that I'm aware of. No disgruntled employees with multiples, no rejected funding for multiple birth research. My company has pharmaceutical and biotech divisions, but nothing specifically related to multiple births, Alexander replied. My security team discovered the breach came through a service entrance with a disabled camera, suggesting whoever left the children knew my property layout. Detective Rivera's expression sharpened. That indicates inside knowledge or extensive surveillance. Do you have enemies who might leave children as some sort of message? The question hung between them, its implications disturbing. I have business rivals, Detective, but this seems extreme even for corporate warfare. Later that afternoon, as Alexander attempted to work, while the nannies, Mrs. Chen and Ms. Patterson, both with impressive credentials, settled into a routine with the babies, Martinez delivered his security report. The service entrance camera was disabled with professional-grade equipment, he explained. Not damaged, but temporarily looped to show an empty corridor. Whoever did this had technical expertise. Alexander frowned. Expand the security team to 24/7 coverage and install additional cameras focusing on the children's suite. Martinez nodded. Already initiated, sir. I've also begun background checks on all staff with access to property schematics. As the 72-hour mark approached, Alexander found himself increasingly drawn to the nursery during breaks. The nannies had established feeding and sleeping schedules, and Alexander observed with fascination how 5 identical babies displayed distinct personalities emerging already. One cried more than the others, another rarely made a sound. One seemed fascinated by the mobile hanging above her crib, while another was more interested in the people moving around the room. They were more than just copies. They were individuals with unique expressions and reactions. "They'll need names," Mrs. Chen mentioned on the 3rd day, noticing Alexander watching the babies during tummy time. Even temporary ones, for practicality. Alexander hesitated, feeling it wasn't his place to name these children. Perhaps something provisional, until their mother is located. The arbitrary 72-hour deadline arrived, and Alexander found himself in a downtown office with his attorney, Jonathan Weber, facing Ms. Cortez and her supervisor. "We've been unable to locate the mother," Ms. Cortez explained. "The investigation is ongoing, but finding placement for quintuplets together is proving challenging." "I'd like to petition for extended emergency guardianship," Alexander stated, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. "I've established appropriate care arrangements, and my resources can provide stability while authorities search for their mother." Jonathan slid a comprehensive care plan across the table, outlining the qualified staff, security measures, and developmental support Alexander was prepared to provide. "This is highly unusual, Mr. Reed," Ms. Cortez's supervisor noted, reviewing the document. "These specific children were left in my care for a reason," Alexander replied, thinking of the note claiming they were in danger. "Something tells me this isn't a simple abandonment case. They need protection I'm uniquely positioned to provide." After lengthy discussion and calls to higher authorities, extended emergency guardianship was provisionally granted for 2 weeks, with strict oversight and daily check-ins from CPS. As Alexander drove home, he reflected on the inexplicable protective instinct these 5 little strangers had awakened in him. The emptiness that had been his constant companion since Catherine's death had been temporarily displaced by a new purpose, one he never could have anticipated when he heard those cries in his garage just 3 days earlier. 2 weeks into his temporary guardianship, Alexander sat cross-legged on the nursery floor, attempting to maintain professional composure during a video conference, while a particularly adventurous quintuplet pulled herself up using his shoulder for balance. "As you can see from the quarterly projections," he continued, gently steadying the baby with one hand while gesturing to the screen with the other. His executive team had adjusted surprisingly well to their CEO's new circumstances, though Alexander caught occasional bemused glances when a baby's gurgle interrupted financial discussions. Mrs. Chen approached silently, scooping up the explorer with practiced ease, but not before the baby's tiny hand knocked Alexander's tablet sideways, giving the board members an unexpected ceiling view. "My apologies," Alexander said smoothly, readjusting the tablet. "Now regarding the European expansion." After the call ended, Alexander checked his watch, nearly time for Detective Rivera's scheduled update. The past 14 days had established a new rhythm to his previously structured life. Board meetings scheduled around nap times, business calls accompanied by the background symphony of baby sounds, and his cold mansion gradually filling with evidence of infant occupation, bottles sterilizing in his seldom-used kitchen, colorful toys scattered across Italian marble floors. The 5 girls, temporarily named after jewels at Mrs. Chen's suggestion, Ruby, Pearl, Amber, Jade, and Opal, were developing distinct personalities despite their identical appearance. Ruby was the vocal leader, Pearl the observer, Amber the climber, Jade the peacemaker, and Opal the contemplative one who seemed to study everything with unusual intensity. "Telling them apart gets easier," Mrs. Chen assured Alexander when he confessed to occasional confusion. Watch their expressions, not just their features. Detective Rivera arrived promptly at 3. Her no-nonsense demeanor softened slightly by a stuffed elephant she discreetly placed on the side table. My niece suggested they might like this, she explained, seeing Alexander's raised eyebrow. I've brought updates on our investigation. Alexander led her to his study, where Martinez joined them for the security briefing. We've identified a pattern of baby formula purchases at specific stores, Rivera explained, displaying a map with highlighted locations. Premium brand, specialized for multiple infants. Purchased regularly until abruptly stopping 3 days before the quintuplets appeared in your garage. Have you identified the purchaser? Alexander asked. Paid in cash, but we have partial camera footage showing a woman in her late 20s, dark hair, approximately 5'6", wearing medical scrubs and sunglasses. She varied her appearance, but maintained similar shopping patterns. Medical scrubs could suggest hospital or laboratory employment, Martinez noted. Rivera nodded. We traced the purchases to an apartment 15 miles south. It was paid through a complex series of shell companies that are taking time to unravel. The apartment was cleared out, but not professionally. We found trace evidence suggesting recent infant occupation and... She hesitated, glancing at Martinez. And what? Alexander prompted. Sophisticated encryption equipment and research documents related to genetic engineering. Nothing identifying the mother, but suggesting she has advanced scientific knowledge and significant resources. Alexander frowned, connecting mental dots. My company has several biotech subsidiaries researching genetic therapies. Could there be a connection? We're exploring all possibilities, Rivera replied diplomatically. The level of planning suggests this wasn't a desperate act, but a calculated decision to place the children specifically with you. After Rivera left, Alexander returned to the nursery, watching as Miss Patterson read a picture book to the 5 attentive babies. Their identical dark eyes followed the colorful illustrations, tiny hands occasionally reaching toward the pages. They're quite advanced for 12-month-olds, Miss Patterson observed when she noticed Alexander watching. Their focus and engagement are impressive. That evening, as Alexander reviewed security footage on his tablet, Martinez entered with a concerned expression. Sir, we've identified surveillance vehicles monitoring the property perimeter. Alexander looked up sharply. Government? Unlikely. Professional but non-standard equipment. They're maintaining legal distance, but are clearly focused on the mansion. They arrived 3 days ago. The note's warning echoed in Alexander's mind. They're in danger. His instinctive request for extended guardianship suddenly seemed prescient rather than impulsive. Double the security team. I want facial recognition on anyone approaching within 2 blocks, and contact Jonathan. We need to prepare for a more permanent guardianship petition while this investigation continues. As Alexander made his way back to the nursery for the baby's bedtime routine, a ritual he'd found himself increasingly drawn to, he realized how dramatically his priorities had shifted in just 2 weeks. The corporate acquisitions that had dominated his thoughts now seemed secondary to ensuring 5 little girls remained safe in his care. The quintuplets were already in their cribs, Miss Patterson softly singing a lullaby. Opal, always the last to sleep, watched Alexander with those unusually intense eyes as he entered. When he approached her crib, she reached up with tiny fingers, grasping his larger one with surprising determination. "Good night, little one," he whispered, surprising himself with the tenderness in his voice. As Opal's eyes finally fluttered closed, Alexander realized something both terrifying and exhilarating. These children, initially an incomprehensible disruption, had somehow become the most important responsibility in his carefully controlled world. 1 month after finding the babies, Alexander sat in Jonathan Weber's office, reviewing the extended guardianship petition. The temporary arrangement was approaching its end, requiring more formal proceedings. "The court will want to know your long-term intentions," Jonathan explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. At 62, he'd been Alexander's attorney since Reed Technologies' founding, but the quintuplets case presented unprecedented legal territory. "My intention is to protect them until their mother is located, or the danger has passed," Alexander replied, reviewing the documents. "And if neither occurs, these are very young children, Alexander. Courts prioritize stability and permanence." The question hung between them, one Alexander had been avoiding in his own thoughts. 1 month ago, he'd been a solitary figure focused exclusively on his business empire. Now his days revolved around 5 little people who depended on him completely. "Let's secure the extended guardianship first," Alexander deflected. "We have compelling evidence of potential danger. The surveillance vehicles, the sophisticated abandonment, Detective Rivera's findings." Jonathan nodded, making notes. "We'll emphasize your resources for protection and care. The judge assigned to the case is Judge Harriman. She's fair but skeptical. Be prepared for personal questions about your lifestyle and commitment." After the meeting, Alexander returned home to find Dr. Khatri waiting in his study. As Reed Technologies' chief scientist, Samira Khatri rarely made house calls, but her expertise in genetics and biomedical research made her invaluable for reviewing the documents Detective Rivera had recovered. "I've analyzed the research materials," she began without preamble, her British Indian accent more pronounced with excitement. "They're extraordinary, Alexander. The formulas suggest experiments involving accelerated neural development, essentially attempting to enhance cognitive function during early development." "In infants?" Alexander asked, disturbed. "Precisely. The approach is theoretically sound, but ethically problematic. It circumvents conventional research protocols and safety measures." She spread several diagrams across his desk. "What's most concerning is the methodology signature. It's distinctly similar to research proposed by Blackwood Pharmaceuticals 3 years ago." Alexander's expression darkened. "Ethan Blackwood's company. The proposals my board rejected as potentially unsafe and ethically questionable. The very same. Blackwood has been pursuing controversial genetic research despite regulatory concerns. These documents suggest they've moved beyond theoretical frameworks to practical application." Alexander's mind raced, connecting fragments of information. The quintuplets' unusual placement in his care, the scientific documents, Blackwood's rejected research proposals, the surveillance. Could Blackwood be conducting unauthorized human trials? He asked quietly. Dr. Khatri hesitated. "These documents alone aren't conclusive, but they suggest concerning possibilities. Have you observed anything unusual about the children's development?" "Nothing extraordinary," Alexander replied. "They're hitting normal milestones for their age. Some early walking attempts, simple words like up and more. They seem alert and engaged, but nothing that would suggest genetic enhancement." "That's actually reassuring," Dr. Khatri noted. "Failed genetic manipulation often presents more visibly than successful enhancements, which might manifest subtly over time." The implications settled heavily on Alexander as he walked Dr. Khatri out. If Blackwood Pharmaceuticals was involved, the situation was potentially more dangerous than he'd initially assumed. Ethan Blackwood was known for ruthless business practices and disregard for regulatory constraints when they interfered with his research goals. Later that afternoon, Ms. Cortez arrived for her weekly evaluation. After observing the quintuplets during playtime and reviewing the nanny's detailed development records, she met with Alexander in the garden terrace. "The care arrangement continues to exceed expectations, Mr. Reed," she acknowledged. The children are thriving, security protocols are exemplary, and your personal involvement has been more significant than I anticipated." Alexander nodded, watching through the glass doors as Ruby attempted to stand independently while Ms. Patterson provided encouraging support. "I have one question that keeps arising during our case reviews," Ms. Cortez continued, studying Alexander carefully. "Are you still willing to return the children to their mother if she's located?" The question caught Alexander off guard. His immediate instinct was, yes, of course, these weren't his children. But watching Ruby finally balance for a precious moment before tumbling into Ms. Patterson's waiting arms, he felt an unexpected hesitation. "That would depend on the circumstances," he answered carefully. "Their safety would be my primary concern." Miss Cortez nodded, making a note. "Your attachment is natural after a month of care. It's something to be mindful of as we proceed." That evening, after the quintuplets were asleep, Alexander found himself in the nursery, watching their peaceful slumber. Pearl clutched a small stuffed rabbit he'd impulsively purchased during a rare personal shopping trip. Jade slept with both arms raised above her head in her signature position. Amber had somehow rotated completely in her crib, her dark hair splayed across the sheet. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of his mansion, warm, colourful, alive with the soft sounds of 5 synchronous breaths. Alexander realized with sudden clarity that he no longer viewed his role as merely temporary. Somewhere in the late-night feedings, the tentative first steps, the bath times filled with splashing and laughter, these 5 little girls had become more than a responsibility. They had become his purpose. 2 months after the baby's arrival, Alexander woke to an urgent alert from his cybersecurity team. At 3:17 a.m., an encrypted email had penetrated his company's advanced security protocols, appearing directly in his private inbox. "They're watching you. Don't trust authorities. The girls are in danger. We'll contact when secure." No signature, no return address. Just 12 words that confirmed his growing suspicions. "Trace it," Alexander instructed his chief security officer via secure line, voice low to avoid waking the sleeping quintuplets in the adjacent suite where he'd taken to sleeping these past weeks. By morning, the cybersecurity team had tracked the email to a university library computer, but security footage showed only a hooded figure who had deliberately avoided camera angles. Professional, methodical, like everything else about this situation. Alexander increased security again, adding a rotating medical team to ensure the quintuplets weren't removed from the property for routine checkups where they might be vulnerable. 2 months into his guardianship, the mansion had been transformed into a secure compound, with the world's most advanced protection systems, all centered around 5 16-month-old girls who were now confidently toddling across custom-padded floors, babbling in their twin language, punctuated by recognizable words. That evening, as Alexander helped Miss Patterson with the bedtime routine, he'd become surprisingly adept at storytelling, different voices for each character delighting his attentive audience. He noticed something unusual about Jade's original blanket, which she still preferred despite having newer options. A slight bulge along the seam caught his attention as he tucked her in. After all 5 were finally asleep, he examined the blanket under his desk lamp, discovering a nearly imperceptible stitching variation. Carefully opening the seam, he extracted a miniature flash drive no larger than his thumbnail. Heart-pounding, Alexander inserted the drive into a secure, isolated laptop. It contained 3 files: medical records for Elena Vasquez, a genetic analysis document, and a video file. The medical records revealed Elena Vasquez was 29, a graduate of MIT with dual doctorates in biomedical engineering and genetics. She had worked briefly for Reed Medical Solutions, a subsidiary Alexander had acquired 3 years earlier before disappearing 18 months ago. Her employee photo showed a striking woman with intelligent dark eyes and an intense expression. Eyes Alexander now recognized in 5 identical little faces. The genetic profiles were highly technical, but even Alexander's limited scientific knowledge recognized the quintuplets' DNA sequences were flagged with markers labeled BPND1 Enhancement Protocol, Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' neural development. With growing apprehension, Alexander opened the video file. Elena Vasquez appeared on screen, her face thinner than the employee photo, dark circles under those familiar eyes suggesting extreme stress. "Mr. Reed," she began, voice low but steady. "If you're watching this, you've been caring for my daughters for some time. I apologize for placing this burden on you without explanation, but I had no choice." She explained that after leaving Reed Medical Solutions, she had infiltrated Blackwood Pharmaceuticals to investigate unethical research practices she'd discovered evidence of during acquisition data transfers. "I became an unwitting test subject," Elena continued, pushing dark hair behind her ear in a gesture Alexander had seen Pearl make countless times. "Routine employee medical screening was used to harvest my eggs without consent. When I discovered the unauthorized procedure and the experimental fertilization, I was already pregnant." Blackwood had been developing genetic modification protocols intended to enhance neural development, creating children with potentially extraordinary cognitive abilities. Elena had discovered her unexpected pregnancy and its connection to the unauthorized experiments, then fled, using her technical expertise to hide while carrying quintuplets, a pregnancy outcome even Blackwood hadn't anticipated. "I chose you because your company publicly opposed Blackwood's research directions," Elena explained. "Your reputation for ethical business practices made you the only person I could trust with my daughters while I gather evidence against Blackwood. Their board has authorized extreme measures to recover what they consider valuable research assets. The babies, they viewed the quintuplets as research assets." "I'm being hunted," Elena continued, her composure finally cracking slightly. "But I'm watching over my daughters from afar. When it's safe, when I have enough evidence to bring Blackwood down completely, I'll contact you. Until then, please protect them. They're developing normally. The enhancements were theoretical, mostly unsuccessful. They're just 5 little girls who need safety until I can reclaim them." The video ended with Elena staring intently into the camera. "Trust no one connected to Blackwood. They have government contacts and potentially compromised law enforcement. I'm sorry for bringing this danger to your door, but you were my only hope." Alexander sat motionless as the screen went dark, processing the implications. The quintuplets weren't random abandoned babies. They were the products of unauthorized genetic experimentation by a corporate rival, placed specifically in his care by their mother, who was gathering evidence while in hiding. It explained everything: the precision of their placement, the security breach expertise, the surveillance, the warning about authorities. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit garden while his mind raced through contingencies. Tomorrow, he would need to expand security again, establish additional safeguards against potential Blackwood infiltration, and accelerate the permanent guardianship process to secure legal protection for the quintuplets. A soft whimper from the nursery monitor drew his attention. Opal, the contemplative one, often woke briefly around this time. Without hesitation, Alexander moved to the nursery, lifting her gently before she could fully wake and disturb her sisters. "Shh, little one," he whispered, cradling her against his chest as he moved to the rocking chair by the window. "You're safe." Opal settled immediately, her tiny hand clutching his shirt as her breathing returned to its peaceful rhythm. Looking down at her perfect face, so similar to the woman in the video, Alexander made a silent promise to both mother and daughters. He would protect these children with everything he had, his resources, his influence, his life if necessary. Whatever Blackwood had intended, Whatever Elena was risking her life to expose, these 5 innocent girls would remain safe in his care until their mother could reclaim them. And if that day never came, Alexander realized with sudden clarity he would raise them as his own, without hesitation. 3 months after finding the babies, Alexander stood in Judge Harriman's chambers alongside Jonathan Webber, presenting their case for extended legal guardianship. The quintuplets, now 15 months old, remained at the mansion under enhanced security while the proceedings continued. "Mr. Reed," Judge Harriman began, her grey hair pulled into a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense reputation, "this is certainly one of the more unusual cases to come before me. You're seeking to extend temporary guardianship indefinitely for 5 children with no biological connection to you, whose mother may or may not return." "That's correct, Your Honor," Alexander replied, maintaining the confident posture that had served him through countless high-stakes negotiations. "The circumstances surrounding their placement in my care and the ongoing investigation into potential threats make a stable arrangement essential for their safety and well-being." Judge Harriman reviewed the thick folder of documentation, which carefully omitted Elena's flash drive message, information Alexander had shared only with his closest security advisors, given her warnings about potential compromised officials. "Detective Rivera's reports indicate sophisticated surveillance of your property and a connection to possible corporate espionage," the judge noted, "and the children's biological mother has made no formal contact with authorities. We believe she's unable to come forward safely at this time," Jonathan interjected smoothly. "Mr. Reed's resources provide the quintuplets with security measures no foster placement could match." Judge Harriman studied Alexander thoughtfully. "Your background is impressive, Mr. Reed, but not traditionally suited to childcare. What prompted this unusual commitment from a man with no previous interest in parenthood?" The question struck closer to Alexander's private thoughts than he expected. 3 months ago, he might have answered with practical reasoning about resources and responsibility. Now, the truth was more complex. "When I found them, Your Honor, they needed protection. That hasn't changed," he replied carefully. "What has changed is my understanding of what they need beyond physical safety: consistency, attachment, stability. I'm committed to providing that for as long as necessary." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Judge Harriman's expression softened slightly. "The developmental specialist's reports indicate the children are thriving in your care," she acknowledged. "That carries significant weight in my consideration." After further questioning and review of the documentation, Judge Harriman granted extended guardianship pending quarterly reviews, a significant legal victory that would protect the quintuplets from potential custody challenges while the investigation continued. "Thank you, Your Honor," Alexander said sincerely as they prepared to leave. "Mr. Reed," Judge Harriman called as he reached the door. "Off the record, I've been on the bench for 30 years. People who seek custody of children for the wrong reasons can't maintain the facade through my questioning. Whatever brought these children to you, they appear to be in good hands." The validation from an experienced jurist settled something in Alexander as he drove home through San Francisco's summer fog. The quintuplets had transformed his life in ways he never could have anticipated, but for the first time since Catherine's death, the mansion felt like a home rather than a monument to his success. Upon his return, Ms. Patterson greeted him with news of developmental milestones achieved during his absence. Amber had spoken her first clear sentence, and Pearl had demonstrated remarkable problem-solving by figuring out how to stack blocks to reach a toy placed on a shelf. "They're developing typical speech patterns for 15-month-olds, reported Dr. Melanie Sanders, the developmental specialist who now visited weekly. "Some slightly advanced verbal skills, but nothing outside normal variation. Their coordination and problem-solving are similarly age-appropriate." Alexander nodded, relieved by the normality of their development. Despite Elena's claim that the genetic modifications had been unsuccessful, he still worried about potential delayed effects. Every milestone reached within typical ranges reassured him. His executive team had adjusted to his new priorities with varying degrees of acceptance. His CFO had initially questioned his reduced hours, but the company's continued strong performance silenced most objections. Alexander had restructured his schedule to conduct meetings during nap times and review financial reports during the quiet evening hours after bedtime. After dinner, as Alexander observed the quintuplets during their evening playtime, Martinez entered with an urgent security update. "Sir, we've intercepted a breach attempt," he reported quietly. 3 professionals with tactical gear attempted to access the eastern perimeter 40 minutes ago. Alexander's pulse quickened. Identification. Negative. They retreated when security responded, but we recovered equipment with serial numbers traced to a private contractor used by Blackwood subsidiaries. The confirmation of Elena's warnings sent a chill through Alexander. Moving closer to where the quintuplets played on their colorful activity mat, he watched Ruby attempting to place shaped blocks into corresponding holes, her dark eyebrows furrowed in concentration exactly like her mother's in the video message. "Increase security protocols to level 2, Alexander instructed. "And contact Detective Rivera. We have actionable evidence now." The attempted breach provided the concrete evidence needed to convince authorities that the children faced genuine danger, extending Alexander's temporary guardianship indefinitely, while the investigation expanded to include Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' potential involvement. That night, Alexander installed additional security measures in the nursery itself, biometric access controls, reinforced doors, and a direct alert system to both security and his personal devices. As he worked, Opal watched him with those unusually perceptive eyes, as if understanding exactly what he was doing and why. "Safe," she said clearly, one of her few distinct words, pointing at the security panel. "That's right," Alexander replied, surprised by her comprehension. "I'm keeping you safe." As he tucked each quintuplet into bed, Alexander found himself wondering about Elena, where she was hiding, what evidence she was gathering, whether she observed her daughters from afar. The quintuplets deserved to know their brave, brilliant mother, who had risked everything to protect them. Until then, Alexander would continue building a fortress of security and normalcy around these 5 little lives that had somehow become the center of his own. 4 months after finding the babies in his garage, Alexander awoke to a security alert on a stormy night eerily similar to the one that had changed his life. Lightning illuminated his bedroom in brief flashes as he reached for his phone, immediately alert despite the late hour. The notification showed movement detected at the service entrance, the same one where he'd discovered the quintuplets. Instead of immediately alerting his security team, Alexander switched to the camera feed, his breath catching as he recognized the hooded figure cautiously navigating the rain-slicked path. Though her face was partially obscured, something in her movements and build matched Elena's photo and video. Alexander's finger hovered over the security alert button, then moved instead to send a message to Martinez. "Potential non-hostile at service entrance. Monitoring personally. Stand by, but do not engage." Alexander moved silently through the darkened house, positioning security personnel discreetly while he made his way to the kitchen, the most likely destination for someone entering through that particular entrance. Minutes later, the door opened carefully and a slender woman in a rain-soaked jacket slipped inside. "You took better care of them than I hoped," she said without turning, her voice matching the video message exactly. "Miss Vasquez," Alexander acknowledged, remaining by the doorway to give her space. Elena Vasquez turned slowly, lowering her hood to reveal the face he'd seen in photographs and video, and in 5 identical, smaller versions every day for the past 4 months. She looked exhausted, thinner than in her employee file photo, with dark circles under her eyes and tension evident in her posture. "Are they safe?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly on the question. "Yes," Alexander assured her. "They're sleeping upstairs with additional security monitoring. They're healthy, developing normally, and protected." Relief washed visibly across Elena's features. "I've been watching when I could, but it wasn't safe to approach until now." "My security team detected your surveillance," Alexander noted without accusation. A ghost of a smile touched Elena's lips. "Only because I allowed it. I needed to confirm you were protecting them adequately." "You could have approached me directly from the beginning," Alexander said, the question that had haunted him for months finally voiced. Elena's expression hardened. "Blackwood had already attempted to abduct me twice. I couldn't risk leading them to my daughters before they were in secure placement." She stepped further into the kitchen, her movements betraying exhaustion. "The quintuplets were never supposed to happen. Multiple embryos were fertilized to increase chances of success, but full quintuplet development was considered statistically improbable." "Why me?" Alexander asked, the question that had lingered since that first night. "Your company rejected Blackwood's research proposals on ethical grounds 3 years ago," Elena explained. "Your security resources were unparalleled, and your public reputation suggested someone who wouldn't simply turn 5 abandoned babies over to authorities Blackwood might influence." Alexander nodded, processing her calculated risk in choosing him. "And now, why emerge after 4 months?" "I've compiled enough evidence to bring Blackwood's neural enhancement program to federal authorities," Elena replied, opening her backpack to reveal several encrypted hard drives. "The evidence includes illegal human trials, unauthorized genetic manipulation, and corporate espionage spanning 5 years. The quintuplets are part of this evidence," Alexander stated, rather than asked. "They were intended to be the proof of concept, genetically enhanced children with accelerated neural development," Eleanor confirmed, her voice tight with controlled anger. "When I discovered what had been done using my genetic material without consent, I accessed their research. The modifications were largely unsuccessful. The quintuplets are developing typically, perhaps with some slight cognitive advantages, but nothing like what Blackwood had projected. Which makes them less valuable as research subjects," Alexander concluded. "But Blackwood still wants to prevent exposure of their unethical practices." Elena nodded, fatigue evident in her movements. "The federal investigation needs to be handled carefully. Blackwood has high-level connections who could bury the evidence or worse, legitimize their research retroactively." Alexander studied the woman before him. Brilliant, determined, and clearly devoted to her daughters, despite the impossible choices she'd faced. "You need rest," he said finally. "The quintuplets usually wake around 6. You could see them then." Something vulnerable flickered across Elena's controlled expression. "I would like that," she whispered. "It's been difficult being separated from them." Alexander led her to a secure guest suite, one equipped with the same security protocols as the nursery, then messaged Martinez to maintain elevated security without alarming the household staff who would arrive in the morning. At precisely 6:15 a.m., Alexander stood in the doorway of the nursery as Elena entered cautiously, her composure finally breaking at the sight of her daughters beginning to stir in their cribs. Ruby was the first to notice the newcomer, her babbling quieting as she stared curiously at her mother. "Hello, my darlings," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face as she approached Ruby's crib. What followed was one of the most remarkable moments Alexander had witnessed. Despite 4 months of separation, the quintuplets recognized their mother instantly. Their faces lit with a joy so pure it was almost painful to observe as Elena sang a soft melody that clearly held meaning from their earliest days together. Even more striking was how differently they responded to her compared to their nannies or Alexander, reaching for her with complete certainty of their connection, babbling excitedly in what seemed like an attempt to tell her everything they'd experienced in her absence. Ms. Patterson arrived for the morning shift, freezing in surprise at the unexpected visitor. Alexander quickly explained the situation in general terms, asking her to give the family privacy while maintaining her normal schedule preparation. Throughout that extraordinary day, Alexander observed the complex emotions Elena navigated: joy at reuniting with her daughters, guilt over their separation, and determination to complete the legal process she'd initiated. Together, they developed a structured plan to present her evidence to federal prosecutors while maintaining the quintuplets' protection. "They know you," Alexander noted that evening, after the babies were asleep. "Despite the separation, they recognized you immediately." Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I sang to them every day during pregnancy and their first months. I hoped they might remember, but wasn't sure." Her voice trailed off as she struggled with emotion. "You did what was necessary to protect them," Alexander said quietly. "They're thriving, Eleanor. They're extraordinary children." Thank you," she replied simply, the words containing depths of gratitude beyond their simplicity, "for becoming what they needed when I couldn't be there." As lightning again illuminated the sky outside, echoing the night that had brought the quintuplets into his life, Alexander realized this was another turning point. The solitary existence he had accepted as his fate after Catherine's death had been irrevocably transformed, first by 5 tiny lives placed unexpectedly in his care, and now by the remarkable woman who had entrusted him with what she valued most in the world. 5 months after finding the babies, Alexander and Elena established a carefully structured arrangement approved by authorities. After Elena's dramatic return and presentation of evidence to federal prosecutors, a complex legal framework was developed to protect both her and the quintuplets during the ensuing investigation. Judge Harriman, impressed by the extensive documentation Elena provided regarding Blackwood's unethical practices, approved a modified guardianship arrangement. Elena was reunited with her daughters under supervised conditions while maintaining the protection of Alexander's security infrastructure. "This is highly unusual," Ms. Cortez acknowledged during a home evaluation following the new arrangement. "But given the extraordinary circumstances and the ongoing federal investigation, the stability and security provided here remain in the children's best interest." The quintuplets, now 17 months old, thrived under the combined care of their mother and Alexander. Elena moved into a secure guest house on the property, allowing her privacy while maintaining the protective perimeter established for the children. The nannies remained, providing continuity for the quintuplets and support for Elena as she readjusted to motherhood while assisting federal investigators. Alexander observed with fascination how the quintuplets responded to their mother's presence. Their language development accelerated almost immediately, as if Eleanor's return had unlocked something in their communication abilities. They now used simple 2-word combinations and demonstrated remarkable comprehension of complex instructions. They're developmentally advanced in language and pattern recognition, noted Dr. Sanders during her weekly assessment, but still within standard ranges for their age group, just on the higher end of the spectrum. Elena reviewed Blackwood's research thoroughly with Dr. Khatri, Alexander's chief scientist. "The enhancements were primarily theoretical," Dr. Khatri explained after analyzing the complete data. Blackwood expected dramatic cognitive acceleration that simply didn't materialize as projected. The modifications appear to have enhanced some neural pathways related to language processing and pattern recognition, but nothing beyond what might occur naturally in particularly gifted children. That's why they became less valuable as research subjects, Elena added, relief evident in her voice. Blackwood expected super children with measurable cognitive advantages from infancy. When those dramatic results didn't appear, the focus shifted to preventing exposure of their unethical practices, rather than recovering the quintuplets themselves. This made the federal case more complex. Blackwood could claim the research was theoretical, rather than applied, if the quintuplets showed no extraordinary abilities. The evidence Elena had gathered became even more crucial, particularly the documentation of unauthorized egg harvesting and embryo manipulation without consent. As summer transitioned to fall, a new routine established itself at the mansion. Alexander continued running his company, now with more regular hours as the quintuplets' schedule became predictable. Elena worked remotely with federal investigators while reconnecting with her daughters, the 5 little girls, blossoming under their mother's care while maintaining their strong bonds with Alexander. "They ask for you when you're in meetings," Eleanor mentioned one evening as they reviewed security protocols in the garden while the quintuplets played nearby. "They have a specific sound that means Alexander in their twin language." The observation warmed something in Alexander's chest. Despite Elena's return, the quintuplets still sought his presence, a validation of the attachment that had developed during her absence. "They're fortunate to have you back," he replied, watching Jade and Pearl cooperate to build a tower of blocks. "Their development has accelerated remarkably since your return." Elena's expression softened as she observed her daughters. "They're fortunate to have both of us," she corrected gently. "You've become important to them, Alexander. You're not just their protector anymore." The federal investigation proceeded methodically, prosecutors building a case against Blackwood's research division while carefully documenting the chain of evidence. Elena's testimony was crucial, her scientific credentials adding weight to her documentation of unethical practices. Alexander's legal team established formal co-guardianship arrangements, providing Elena with legal rights to her daughters while maintaining the security framework that protected them from potential Blackwood retaliation. The arrangement was unprecedented but effective, combining Elena's maternal rights with Alexander's resources and protection. 6 months after finding the quintuplets, medical evaluations confirmed they continued developing within normal parameters. Advanced in some areas like language and pattern recognition, but not dramatically beyond their peers. Their identical appearance still occasionally confused visitors, but those who spent time with them easily distinguished their unique personalities and expressions. The genetic modifications were far less effective than Blackwood projected, Eleanor explained after reviewing their latest developmental assessments. They're healthy, normal children with perhaps some slight advantages in specific cognitive areas. This normalcy made them less valuable to Blackwood as research subjects, but the company still wanted to prevent exposure of their unethical practices. The surveillance continued, though less aggressively, as federal scrutiny intensified around Blackwood's operations. Alexander found himself adjusting to this new dynamic, no longer the quintuplets' primary caregiver, but still an essential part of their lives. He and Eleanor developed a respectful partnership built on their shared commitment to the children's well-being, their initial wariness evolving into mutual appreciation. In quiet moments, Alexander sometimes wondered about the future. Eleanor would eventually want independence for herself and her daughters once the danger had passed. The thought of the quintuplets leaving his home created an unexpected ache he wasn't prepared to examine too closely. One evening, as Alexander returned from a business meeting, he paused in the nursery doorway. Elena sat surrounded by her daughters, reading a story with different voices for each character, exactly as Alexander had done during her absence. Amber noticed him first, her face lighting with recognition. "Ander!" she called clearly, the closest approximation to his name her developing speech could manage. The other four heads turned in unison, identical expressions of delight spreading across their faces as they scrambled toward him with outstretched arms. Elena met his gaze over the children's heads, a complex understanding passing between them. Whatever the future held, these 5 little lives had connected them in ways neither could have anticipated, creating something neither was prepared to relinquish. 8 months after the babies arrived, with the quintuplets now reaching 20 months, the federal investigation into Blackwood Pharmaceuticals culminated in formal indictments against the company's research division. 7 executives and researchers faced charges ranging from unauthorized human experimentation to corporate espionage and falsification of medical records. Alexander reviewed the indictment documents in his study, noting with satisfaction that the charges aligned with Elena's evidence. However, one name was conspicuously absent from the indictments: Maxwell Pierce, Blackwood's CEO and founder. "He's maintained plausible deniability," Elena explained, frustration evident in her voice as she joined Alexander. The research division was deliberately structured to shield upper management from direct knowledge of unethical practices. "Typical corporate insulation strategy," Alexander agreed, familiar with the tactic from his years navigating complex business structures. The researchers take the fall while the leadership claims ignorance. This legal maneuver might have succeeded if not for Pierce's next move, a direct approach to Alexander that revealed his actual knowledge and involvement. The contact came through legitimate business channels, a request for a private meeting between CEOs to discuss mutual interests in biomedical research. "It's clearly about the quintuplets," Alexander told Elena after receiving the request. "Pierce wouldn't risk direct contact unless he felt cornered." After consultation with federal prosecutors, who saw an opportunity to gather evidence of Pierce's direct knowledge, a meeting was arranged at a neutral location with discreet monitoring equipment in place. Alexander would attend alone, presenting himself as a potential business ally rather than an adversary. The meeting took place at an exclusive San Francisco club where privacy was guaranteed and security was tight enough to reassure both parties. Maxwell Pierce, at 62, projected the confident demeanor of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. His silver hair and tailored suit created the image of distinguished corporate leadership that had made him a fixture in business magazines. "Alexander," he greeted warmly, as if they were old friends rather than adversaries in an unfolding legal battle. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I believe we can resolve our situation to mutual benefit." Alexander maintained a neutral expression, years of high-stakes negotiations serving him well. "I'm always interested in beneficial resolutions, Maxwell." After preliminary pleasantries, Pierce revealed his true purpose with characteristic directness. "Those children residing in your home are the result of proprietary Blackwood research," he stated, watching Alexander carefully for reaction. "Revolutionary genetic enhancements that represent billions in potential medical applications." "You're referring to Elena Vasquez's daughters," Alexander replied coolly. "The children placed in my care after unauthorized experimentation." Pierce waved a dismissive hand. "Legal semantics that distract from the greater significance. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for genetic testing rights, ongoing monitoring of their development without any interference in their daily lives. And in exchange," Alexander prompted, maintaining the facade of interest while the recording devices captured Pierce's every word, "certain evidence would be returned to Blackwood's possession, Ms. Vasquez's testimony would become unavailable, and the public narrative would shift to focus on rogue researchers rather than company-directed initiatives. Pierce's smile didn't reach his eyes. Everyone benefits: financial security for the children, resolution of legal complications, and scientific progress preserved. Alexander allowed a thoughtful expression to cross his features. An interesting proposition. What figure did you have in mind for this arrangement? The number Pierce named was staggering, enough to establish the quintuplets as wealthy individuals for life. The offer confirmed what Alexander had suspected. Blackwood was desperate to contain the damage, willing to pay extraordinary sums to prevent full exposure of their operations. "I'll need to consider the proposal," Alexander replied non-committally. "There are multiple stakeholders involved." Pierce's expression hardened slightly. "Don't overthink this, Alexander. Those children are enhanced human subjects developed through Blackwood technology. If this reaches certain courts, custody questions could become quite complex." The thinly veiled threat was exactly what the federal prosecutors had hoped to capture: direct knowledge of the unauthorized experiments and an attempt to leverage that knowledge for corporate benefit. After the meeting, Alexander met with his legal team and federal prosecutors to review the recording and develop a counter-strategy. Rather than proceeding directly to additional charges, they crafted a comprehensive settlement approach designed to protect the quintuplets while extracting maximum concessions from Blackwood. "We leverage Pierce's recorded threats and explicit knowledge of the unauthorized experimentation," Jonathan explained during the strategy session. "In exchange for reduced personal charges, Blackwood surrenders all research related to the quintuplets, establishes a substantial trust fund for their future, and signs comprehensive non-disclosure and non-contact agreements." "And if they refuse?" Elena asked, the protective intensity Alexander had come to recognize flaring in her expression. "Then we proceed with additional charges against Pierce personally," the federal prosecutor replied. "The recording provides clear evidence of knowledge and participation that the corporate structure was designed to obscure. He'd face significant prison time." Alexander's team arranged a formal response meeting with Blackwood's representatives. In the opulent conference room of Jonathan's law firm, Alexander and his attorneys faced Pierce and his legal team across a polished mahogany table. "You'll face criminal charges and complete financial ruin if this reaches trial," Jonathan informed Pierce, presenting evidence that even Blackwood's carefully structured deniability couldn't withstand. "Or we can structure a settlement that allows your company to survive while providing appropriate restitution." Now, the negotiations lasted weeks, proceeding under federal supervision, with both Alexander and Elena refusing any terms that wouldn't guarantee the children's complete freedom from Blackwood's influence. Finally, a comprehensive agreement was reached, one that provided security for the quintuplets while ensuring Blackwood could never again pursue similar research. During this intense period, the quintuplets continued their developmental progress, oblivious to the legal battles surrounding their existence. Their vocabulary expanded rapidly, now including complete sentences and increasingly complex concepts. They played elaborate games together, demonstrating the twin language common among multiples, but with sophisticated variations that hinted at their enhanced language processing. "And come play," Lily commanded one evening, tugging Alexander's hand toward the complex block structure her sisters were building. "We make castle for dragons." These moments of normal childhood, amid the extraordinary circumstances, grounded both Alexander and Elena, reminding them why the legal battles were necessary. The quintuplets deserved the chance to develop as individuals, free from their origin as experimental subjects. As the settlement was finalized, providing a trust fund for the quintuplets' future and legal protections against any further Blackwood interference, Alexander found himself contemplating the longer-term future. The immediate threat was resolving, but his attachment to the 5 little girls who had transformed his life remained as strong as ever. "What happens next?" he asked Elena quietly one evening after the quintuplets were asleep. Her thoughtful expression suggested she'd been considering the same question. "We've been focused on protection and legal battles for so long," she replied. "Now we need to determine what normal looks like for this very unusual family." The word family lingered between them, carrying implications neither was quite ready to articulate, but both had begun to consider. 1 year after finding the babies in his garage, Alexander hosted a private celebration for their 2nd birthday. The mansion's garden was transformed with colorful decorations, a small petting zoo, and 5 identical birthday cakes, each decorated to reflect the distinct personality of its recipient. The legal battles had resulted in a comprehensive settlement. Blackwood restructured under federal monitoring, the executives responsible faced criminal charges, and a substantial trust was established for the quintuplets' future. Maxwell Pierce had resigned as CEO, accepting a plea agreement that included significant financial penalties while avoiding prison time, a compromise that frustrated Eleanor but provided finality to the ordeal. "I wanted him to face full consequences," she admitted to Alexander as they watched the quintuplets delight in petting gentle farm animals brought for the occasion. "But the settlement guarantees the girls' security and prevents Blackwood from pursuing similar research." The quintuplets, now officially named Lily, Violet, Rose, Iris, and Daisy at Elena's request, were developing into energetic toddlers with increasingly distinct personalities despite their identical appearance. Lily had emerged as the natural leader, organizing her sisters in elaborate games and speaking in the most complete sentences. Violet was the artist, already showing remarkable precision in her colorful drawings. Rose was the peacemaker, instinctively mediating when conflicts arose. Iris was the explorer, constantly testing boundaries and physical capabilities. And Daisy remained the observer, watching everything with thoughtful intensity before participating. They would have been extraordinary regardless of Blackwood's interference, Elena told Alexander as they watched the girls playing. Their individual personalities emerged despite identical genetics and experimental tampering. The past year had transformed not only the quintuplets, but also the adults responsible for them. Elena had healed from the trauma of her experience at Blackwood, gradually reclaiming her scientific confidence. She had accepted a position directing a research ethics division within Alexander's company, using her experience to prevent similar exploitation within the biomedical industry. Alexander had evolved from a solitary figure focused exclusively on business success to someone whose schedule revolved around 5 little people who called him Ander with affection. His executive team had adapted to their CEO's transformed priorities, scheduling board meetings around preschool events and accepting occasional background noise of children playing during important calls. Together, Alexander and Elena had established the Reed Vasquez Foundation, dedicated to oversight of genetic research ethics, with profits directed to children's advocacy. Their professional partnership had developed alongside their personal one, moving cautiously from co-guardians to friends, both healing from past traumas through their unexpected connection. "They're asking questions about family structures," Elena mentioned as they prepared for the birthday celebration. "They notice other children have different arrangements than ours." The observation highlighted the unusual nature of their household. Eleanor had moved from the guest house into a suite in the main residence 6 months earlier, providing more integrated care while maintaining appropriate boundaries. The nannies had transitioned to part-time roles, supporting the family rather than providing primary care. "What do you tell them?" Alexander asked, curious about how Elena explained their situation. "The truth, in age-appropriate terms," she replied. that Mommy had them in her tummy, that they needed special protection, and that Alexander helps keep them safe and loves them very much. The simplicity of the explanation belied the complexity of emotions it stirred in Alexander. He had never articulated his feelings for the quintuplets in precisely those terms, but Elena's assessment was accurate. Somewhere between finding them in his garage and celebrating their second birthday, 5 little girls had claimed a portion of his heart he'd thought permanently closed after Catherine's death. The birthday celebration concluded with a tradition Alexander had instituted during their first year, a quiet moment with each quintuplet individually before bedtime, honoring their unique personalities despite their identical appearance. Lily showed him a complex block structure she'd built, narrating her architectural vision with serious intent. Violet presented a colorful drawing of what she identified as our family, stick figures of varying heights but recognizable as their household. Rose offered a solemn hug and whispered, "Thank you for my party," with sincere appreciation. Iris demonstrated her new jumping ability with exuberant energy. Daisy simply climbed into his lap with a favorite book, content with his presence rather than conversation. Later that evening, after the quintuplets were asleep, Alexander found Eleanor in the garden, collecting forgotten toys in the moonlight. "They're happy," she said, not looking up as he approached. "Despite everything, the separation, the danger, the unusual circumstances, they're secure and thriving." "Because of you," Alexander replied, helping gather small plastic animals scattered across the lawn. Elena shook her head slightly. "Because of us," she corrected, finally meeting his gaze. "They need both of us, Alexander. They've formed attachments to both of us." The implication hung between them, a question about the future neither had fully articulated. Their relationship had evolved cautiously, mutual respect gradually developing into friendship. Both carried wounds from their pasts, Eleanor from her traumatic experience at Blackwood, Alexander from losing Catherine. "I never expected to have children," Alexander admitted, voicing thoughts he'd rarely shared. "After Catherine died, I assumed that part of life was closed to me." I never expected to have quintuplets," Eleanor replied with a small smile, "or to share their upbringing with a tech billionaire I'd strategically selected as their protector." The absurdity of their situation struck them simultaneously, tension breaking as they both laughed softly in the moonlight. "We've created something good from an impossible situation," Alexander observed, looking toward the wing where 5 little girls slept peacefully. "Something worth preserving." Elena's expression softened. "Yes," she agreed simply. "We have." The conversation marked a turning point, an acknowledgement that their arrangement had evolved beyond temporary necessity into something both valued. Neither rushed to define it further that night, but a threshold had been crossed in their gradual journey from strangers connected by circumstance to partners united by 5 extraordinary children. Alexander's previously cold mansion had transformed over the past year into a home filled with evidence of the quintuplets' presence. Finger paintings displayed alongside valuable artwork, child-sized furniture integrated with designer pieces, the sounds of laughter and occasional tantrums echoing through previously silent halls. As Alexander made his final security check that night, a habit maintained despite the reduced threat, he paused in the quintuplets' doorway, watching 5 identical little girls sleeping peacefully in their toddler beds. The sight still occasionally struck him with its improbability. 5 perfect little humans who had appeared in his life through extraordinary circumstances and transformed it completely. Whatever the future held, Alexander knew with certainty that finding those babies in his garage 1 year ago had given him something he'd thought permanently lost after Catherine's death. A family, unconventional as it might be, and a renewed sense of purpose beyond corporate success. 3 years after the stormy night that changed everything, Alexander stood in the garden, watching the quintuplets, now 4 years old, playing an elaborate game of their own invention. The game involved complex rules they had developed together, with Lily as usual serving as referee for disputes that arose between her sisters. "No, Iris, you can't change the dragon's color after you chose it," Lily explained patiently to her more impulsive sister. "Remember the third rule?" Iris briefly pouted but quickly recovered, adapting her strategy within the established framework. Their ability to create and maintain sophisticated play scenarios continued to impress their developmental specialists, who noted the quintuplets functioned at the upper range of cognitive expectations for their age. "They're starting kindergarten preparatory classes next month," Elena remarked, joining Alexander on the terrace. "The school's security protocols have been finalized to your specifications." Alexander nodded, watching as Violet carefully illustrated the dragon cards central to their game. "The director understands the unique circumstances." "As much as necessary," Elena confirmed. They know the girls require additional security due to their connection to a sensitive corporate case, without specific details about their origin. The previous year had brought significant changes to their unusual family structure. The legal adoption had been finalized, making Alexander the quintuplets' legal father, while Elena retained her maternal rights. The arrangement recognized the reality that had developed. Both adults were essential to the quintuplets' well-being and security. Blackwood Pharmaceuticals had been comprehensively restructured under the settlement agreement, with its unethical research division dismantled and its legitimate medical development placed under external oversight. Maxwell Pierce had retired in disgrace, his reputation tarnished despite avoiding criminal conviction. Most importantly, the quintuplets had continued developing as normal, healthy children, advanced in language processing and certain cognitive functions, but without the dramatic enhancements Blackwood had projected. They spoke in complete, complex sentences, demonstrated impressive problem-solving abilities, and showed normal attachment to both Elena and Alexander. "Daddy, come see my dragon!" Daisy called, using the title Alexander had never insisted upon, but the quintuplets had naturally adopted after the legal adoption. Her sisters immediately echoed the invitation, 5 identical faces turning toward him with varying expressions of excitement. Alexander joined their circle, examining the intricate game they had created, complete with hand-drawn cards. Rules that incorporated elements of strategy and chance, and clearly defined roles for each participant. Their cognitive development remained remarkable, but within normal parameters for particularly gifted children, exactly as Elena had predicted. "Very impressive," he commented, genuinely amazed by their creativity. "Who invented this game?" "We all did together," Rose explained earnestly. "Lily made the rules, Violet drew the cards, I decided how to win, Iris made up the dragon powers, and Daisy named all the dragons." Their collaborative approach highlighted how they functioned as both individuals and a unit, maintaining their unique personalities while leveraging their identical genetics and shared experiences to create something none could have developed alone. Later that evening, as the family shared dinner in the kitchen, a habit Alexander had initially found strange but now cherished, Elena brought up the subject they'd been cautiously circling for months. "The girls asked again about why we have different last names, but live in the same house," she mentioned, passing Alexander the salad. "They're becoming more aware of conventional family structures through their playgroups." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Their relationship had evolved gradually over 3 years, from cautious co-guardians to partners in both parenting and professional endeavors. Elena now directed the Reed Vasquez Foundation in addition to her research ethics division, her scientific brilliance and personal experience making her uniquely qualified for both roles. Their personal relationship had developed with similar care, friendship deepening into romantic attachment only after the quintuplets' security was assured, and both had begun healing from their respective traumas. They had maintained separate living spaces within the mansion, even as they functioned increasingly as a unified family unit. "What did you tell them?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious about Elena's response. "That grown-ups sometimes take time to decide about certain things," she replied with a small smile, "and that families come in many different forms." After the quintuplets were settled for the night, a process that now included individual reading time, a complex bedtime routine with specific stuffed animals in precise arrangements, and goodnight kisses from both adults, Alexander and Elena returned to the garden terrace that had become their regular evening retreat. "They're becoming more aware of social structures and expectations," Eleanor noted, continuing their earlier conversation. "Their questions will become more specific as they interact with more children their age." Alexander nodded, considering the implications. "We should consider what we want our family structure to look like moving forward," he suggested carefully, "for both our sake and theirs." Elena studied him thoughtfully, the directness that had initially drawn him to her evident in her gaze. "Are you proposing we formalize our arrangement, Alexander?" "I'm proposing we acknowledge what already exists," he replied honestly. "A family that formed through extraordinary circumstances but has become something neither of us wants to relinquish." Elena's expression softened. "The quintuplets need stability and clarity about their family structure as they begin school and expand their social circles." "And what do you need, Elena?" Alexander asked, the question carrying deeper significance than its simplicity suggested. Her answer came without hesitation. "A partner who respects my independence while sharing my commitment to 5 extraordinary little girls. Someone who understands our unusual journey because he's traveled it alongside me." She met his gaze directly. "I believe I've found that in you." The moment marked the culmination of a journey neither could have imagined that stormy night 3 years earlier. Alexander Reed, once defined by solitary success, and Elena Vasquez, once forced into isolation to protect her daughters, finding unexpected connection through 5 remarkable children who needed them both. 2 months later, a simple ceremony in the garden where the quintuplets played daily formalized what had already developed. A family united not by conventional beginnings, but by choice, commitment, and 5 identical little girls who served as flower bearers, ring bearers, and enthusiastic participants in the celebration. The Reed-Vasquez family continued to navigate their unusual circumstances with the same determination that had characterized their journey from the beginning. The quintuplets attended a carefully selected private school with enhanced security but normal educational approaches, showing intelligence but not the supernatural abilities Blackwood had envisioned. Alexander's business associates adjusted to his transformed priorities, accepting that board meetings might occasionally be interrupted by a child's important question or artwork presentation. Elena's scientific contributions to ethical research oversight earned recognition within the biomedical community, creating protocols to prevent similar exploitation of vulnerable subjects. On quiet evenings, Alexander often reflected on how 5 abandoned babies had filled the emptiness in his life, transforming his monument to success into a true home filled with laughter, challenges, and profound connection. "I was supposed to be their temporary protector," he told Elena as they watched their daughters chase fireflies in the twilight, their identical forms creating a magical dance of movement across the lawn. "But they saved me instead." Elena's hand found his in the gathering darkness, her response encompassing the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. Sometimes, the most unexpected storms bring exactly what we need, even when we don't recognize it arriving in our garage at midnight. Their laughter joined the quintuplet's delighted squeals as darkness fell. 5 extraordinary little girls and the 2 adults who had found unexpected healing through protecting them, creating a moment of perfect contentment that none could have anticipated on that stormy night 4 years earlier.